In the grimy bowels of Citadel Station, much like the universe's favorite cheap motel, the air was thick with the smell of desperation and fried lubricant. The corridors hummed with the whispers of 1,000 aliens, each one hoping their species wouldn't be obliterated by the end of this so-called peace conference. An event about as promising as a vegan barbecue, if you asked any sane person. Which, coincidentally, no one had. Ambassador Vexer Thorne, the human representative, was leaning against a wall that was doing its best impression of a colony of fungus. He was busy swatting at the persistent cloud of floating dust that seemed chemically attracted to his suit. Could this station be any more of a dump? He muttered to no one in particular. It wasn't a real question. If the aliens don't kill us, tetanus will. The station was a marvel of deteriorating engineering, a relic of a bygone era when people thought chrome and neon could solve everything, including space-time wrinkles and intergalactic hostility. Vexer's assistant, a humorless bot named R1N0, responded with all the warmth of an iceberg. Ambassador, the likelihood of tetanus affecting, it's a joke, R1, Vexer interrupted. You know, humor? That thing the universe forgot when it decided to invent sentience? R1N0's circuits whirred in something that might have been an approximation of embarrassment. Or maybe it just needed an oil change. Acknowledged. The room they were gathered in was a masterpiece of bad taste, with seats that looked like they'd been stolen from a retro diner and a hollow table in the center that flickered with the enthusiasm of a dying star. Representatives from various species were already seated, engaged in the universal pastime of pretending to listen while planning each other's funerals. Vexer scanned the room. There was Ambassador RKKTZZ, of the insectoid Frkni, clicking its mandibles in a way that might have been polite applause or a preparation for decapitating the nearest diplomat. Then there was the gelatinous form of Zerg Zerg, representing the ever-fluid inhabitants of GELAPLEX5, who seemed to be in perpetual mid-melt. And let's not forget Takor, the hulking brute from a warrior race whose name no one could pronounce without a tongue injury. Quite the gathering, Vexer said, smiling the way a used car salesman does when he's about to close a deal on a vehicle with no brakes. All the galaxy's finest and most expendable. Suddenly, the station shook. Not the gentle lurch of a malfunctioning engine, but a seismic event more suited to a planet-killer weapon. The lights flickered ominously, and a few alien representatives let out noises that translated roughly to, "What the hell was that?" "Ladies and gentlemen," Vexer commented dryly, "it appears someone's decided to crash our little get-together." "Anyone lose a giant warship?" RKKTZZ emitted a series of high-pitched clicks that Vexer's translator cheerfully interpreted as, "This is an act of war." "Calm down, RKK," Vexer said with a casualness that was either bravado or stupidity. "Let's not jump to conclusions before we know who's shooting at us. Could just be a meteorite with an attitude problem." Another shudder ran through the station, this time accompanied by the screech of metal protesting its misuse. The station's intercom crackled to life, a voice dripping with anxiety. "Attention, all representatives. We are under siege from an unknown enemy. Docking bays are compromised. Repeat, docking bays are compromised." "Well, isn't that just peachy?" Vexer muttered, casting a glance at R1N0. "Guess we're staying for the after-party." Takor, who had been quietly cracking its knuckles, spoke up, its voice like gravel in a blender. "If this is a siege, then we must prepare for combat." Zerg Zerg burbled in agreement, or maybe it was just digesting something particularly chewy. Hard to tell with sentient jello. Vexer sighed, running a hand through his hair, his one good feature, or so he'd been told by the mirror, his only honest critic. "All right, folks, looks like we're in this together. Now, let's try and not kill each other before whatever's out there does it for us." The station groaned again, like an old man getting out of bed, reminding everyone that the only thing holding it together was wishful thinking and a few prayer circuits. "Suggestions?" Vexer asked, feeling the weight of leadership settle uncomfortably on his shoulders, like a cat that refused to move. RKKTZZ clicked nervously. "We must fortify our defenses." "Defenses?" Vexer laughed. "RKK, this station barely has functioning toilets. And you want defenses?" Takor stood, exuding the kind of confidence only someone with a personal armory could have. "I will lead the effort." The alien's armor clanked ominously, a sound that made everyone suddenly very aware of their lack of personal armor. "Right," Vexer said. "Takor, You handle the people smashing through walls thing. RKK, Zerg. See if you can figure out who wants us dead and why. R1, with me. Let's see if we can't talk our way out of this mess. As they began to move, the station's lights flickered again, painting the room in a strobe of panic and resolve. It was going to take more than diplomatic charm and rusty corridors to get out of this one. They made their way through the maze-like hallways, past doors that looked like they had been installed by a drunk architect with a grudge against straight lines. Vexer led the way, his footsteps echoing with the kind of determination usually reserved for people walking towards their execution. "What's the plan, Ambassador?" R1N0 asked, its voice as neutral as Switzerland pretended to be in the last Galactic War. "The plan?" Vexer said, as they rounded a corner and nearly collided with a panicked group of station workers. "I was hoping you'd have won. My calculations suggest survival odds are less than optimal," R1N0 replied. Vexer chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Good thing I never cared much for odds." The control room was chaos incarnate, screens flashing warnings in every language known to sapient life. The station's commander, a Groshan named Flirk, was barking orders like a drill sergeant on a caffeine high. "Ambassador Thorne," Flirk greeted, or rather, stated, a formality more than a warmth. "Glad you could join us for the end of days. Wouldn't miss it for the world," Vexer shot back. "Now, what are we dealing with, and can I tell them to sod off?" Flirk gestured towards a screen displaying a massive ship hovering outside the station like a shark waiting at a buffet. "Unknown adversary, no communication received. They're just sitting there." "Well, that's rude," Vexer said. "Let's send them a message. Something along the lines of, 'Go away, we're busy.'" "I doubt politeness will resolve this," Flirk deadpanned. Another jolt rocked the station, followed by the unnerving sound of something very large, very heavy, and very hostile docking where no ship should. "Looks like they've decided to let themselves in," Vexer said. "I appreciate their forwardness, just not the methods." Takor, who had somehow materialized at his side, grunted in agreement. "We should prepare for confrontation." "You say that like it's an option," Vexer replied, sarcasm dripping from his words like oil from a broken pipe. "Flirk, any idea what they want?" The Groshan shook its head, a motion unsettlingly similar to a snake unhinging its jaw. "Nothing, not a peep. They're playing this close to the chest." "Great," Vexer muttered. "A siege and the silent treatment. Exactly what I need today." The station shuddered again, this time more violently, as though warning everyone present that death was not just a possibility, but a probable inconvenience. Vexer took a breath, the kind one takes before diving into icy water or into a vat of bad decisions. "Fine," he said, "let's open a channel, see if our new friends are in the mood for a chat before they decide to redecorate the place with our insides." Flirk nodded, and the static-filled channel opened. Vexer stepped forward, broadcasting as much confidence as a man condemned to negotiate with a brick wall. "This is Ambassador Vexer Thorne of the United Coalition. You're attacking a diplomatic station. Care to explain why, or do you just hate peace talks?" There was a pause, filled with the kind of tense silence that thoughtful executioners and disappointed parents are good at. Then a voice, cold and metallic, crackled over the speakers. "Ambassador Thorne, stand by for instructions." "Instructions?" Vexer repeated, a bitter laugh escaping before he could stop it. "Well, at least they're polite about it." The voice continued, devoid of any semblance of empathy. "Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with force." Vexer sighed, glancing at his companions. "You heard the man. Looks like we're on the menu." Takor's hands flexed, eager for action, while R1N0's optics dimmed slightly, recalculating probabilities. "Prepare for boarding," Vexer echoed, feeling the weight of inevitability settle in like an unwelcome houseguest. "And here I thought today couldn't get any worse." The station groaned again, a reminder that survival was not a guaranteed outcome. As the room buzzed with the chaos of preparation, Vexer leaned close to R1N0. "Adjust those odds. I want to know if we're going to need luck, skill, or divine intervention." R1N0's circuits hummed. "All of the above, Ambassador." "All of the above, figures," Vexer said, steeling himself for the inevitable clash. "Let's see if we can't make a miracle out of this mess yet." And with that, Citadel Station braced itself, each race, each representative, each flawed and desperate soul, for the battle that destiny had so rudely thrust upon them. The hollow table flickered like an old hologram of a marriage proposal that ended in a restraining order. The station's air had the feeling of desperation, mixed with the tang of burnt circuitry and the unmistakable stench of fear, which smelled remarkably like stale coffee and regret. Ambassador Vexer Thorn surveyed the chaos, a veritable symphony of species on the brink of collective apoplexy. R1. Remind me why I decided to spend my weekend here instead of at home watching the paint peel? R1N0, ever the model of robotic efficiency, chimed in with the enthusiasm of a toaster. Because you lost a bet with Ambassador Thelma from the Lorenth Consortium, sir. Ah, right, Vexer sighed. Mental note. Stop betting with someone who can read minds. RKKTZZ, the insectoid Thrkni, was pacing, or whatever the equivalent was for a six-legged diplomat with more joints than a conspiracy theorist's corkboard. Its mandibles clicked in a rhythm that Vexer was certain was the Thrkni equivalent of muttering angrily under one's breath. Ambassador Thorn, RKKTZZ clicked, we must address the demands of these aggressors. They're targeting humans specifically. Well, isn't that just swell? Vexer replied, his voice practically dripping with sardonic glee. It's nice to be wanted, except when it's by angry aliens with too many guns and not enough patience. Flirk, the station commander, was shouting into a comm device, trying to coordinate a defense that was about as organized as a cat-herding session. We can't hold them off without knowing their demands. They're zeroing in on human life signs. Vexer turned to Takor, who was fiddling with a device that looked suspiciously like a miniaturized Death Star. Any chance you warrior types have a secret stash of miracle weapons you'd like to share with the class? Takor gave a heavy grunt, the kind that sounded like a rockslide in a cement mixer. We have strength. We fight with honor. Honor, Vexer mused, adjusting his suit which had seen better days, much like his career. That's what old soldiers use to polish their gravestones. The station's intercom crackled again, the voice on the other end managing to sound like it was coming from a distance somewhere between disdain and boredom. Surrender the humans, and no further harm will come to the rest of you. Isn't that considerate? Vexer muttered under his breath, his sarcasm hanging in the air like a bad smell. We're being thrown under the bus. Except, in this case, the bus is a giant space thing and we're the tires. Zerg zerg, the gelatinous ambassador, burbled something that could have been sympathy or indigestion. Vexer decided to pretend it was the former. What do we do, Vexer? R1N0 asked, its voice calm, the kind of calm usually associated with someone who's resigned to their fate. We play for time, R1. If they've come all this way just to chat, let's not keep them waiting, Vexer decided, pressing a button on the comm panel that looked like it hadn't been pressed in several decades. This is Ambassador Vexer Thorn. We're willing to discuss terms, but we can't exactly roll over and play dead without knowing who we're dealing with. There was a pause, filled with the hum of the station's failing life support and the distant sound of something expensive breaking. This is not a negotiation, Ambassador Thorn, the voice replied. Surrender the humans or face annihilation. Friendly chap, Vexer said to no one in particular. I bet he's a riot at parties. We need more information, RKKTZZ insisted, its clicks becoming more urgent. Who are these attackers? Why target humans? Great questions, RKK, Vexer said. If we survive, I'll buy you a drink and we'll discuss them at length. But right now, how about we focus on not getting vaporized? The room was silent except for the occasional beep from the holotable and the whir of R1N0's internal processors. It was a silence that spoke volumes, none of them good. Maybe they're just jealous of our good looks and charm, Vexer suggested, more to himself than anyone else. Flirk, still managing to look like a reptilian quarterback under pressure, gestured towards the main screen, now displaying a clearer image of the enemy vessel. Their ship's tech is beyond anything I've seen. We're outclassed. Outclassed? Vexer raised an eyebrow. Flirk, we're not even in the same league. We're like a toddler in a boxing ring. The Groshan commander glanced at Vexer with an expression that said it wished it was anywhere but here. Preferably somewhere with less imminent death and more drinks with little umbrellas. So, we're being targeted because we're human, Vexer summarized, trying to ignore the tightening knot in his stomach. And the rest of you are just collateral damage unless we hand ourselves over. Affirmative, R1N0 confirmed. Probability of successful negotiation without compliance is statistically insignificant. Thanks, R1, Vexer replied dryly. Your unbridled optimism is heartening. Takor's eyes gleamed with a warrior's resolve, the kind that would have been inspirational if it wasn't so likely to get them all killed. We fight, it declared, a simple solution from a simple species. That's Plan B, Vexer said. Plan A is not dying. We need to draw them out, learn who they are, and why they're so keen on rearranging our atoms. I can attempt to hack into their systems, R1N0 suggested. Risk is high, but information is crucial. Risk is high? Vexer chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. Let's face it, R1, our entire existence is one big risk assessment gone wrong. Commencing hacking attempt, R1N0 stated, its optics flickering as it interfaced with the station's limited tech. Meanwhile, Flirk manned the controls, the Grotian scales glistening under the harsh lights like an oil slick on a particularly bad day at sea. Defensive systems are barely operational. We're holding them off for now, but not for long. You know, Flirk, Vexer said, watching the aliens' attempts to keep the station from falling apart. If we make it out of this, I'm buying you a drink. And not just any drink, the kind that blurs species and memories. Appreciated, Flirk replied without looking up, its eyes fixed on the blips of enemy crafts on the screen. The room seemed to vibrate with tension, every being aware that the next few moments could determine whether they'd be remembered as heroes, or forgotten as another failed peace summit. Vexer felt the weight of it, heavy and uncomfortable, like a suit 2 sizes too small. Incoming transmission, R1N0 announced, its tone about as excited as a rock in a landslide. Attempt to access their systems was partially successful. Great, Vexer said, half expecting the next piece of news to be, we're all doomed. What did you find? A partial manifesto and some communication logs, R1N0 reported. The attackers call themselves the Purge. They believe humans are destabilizing the galaxy. Vexer let out a low whistle, a bitter smile playing on his lips. Fantastic. We've pissed off space zealots. That's always good for morale. Can we use this information? RKKTZZ asked, its mandibles clicking in a pattern reminiscent of someone nervously drumming their fingers. Use it? Vexer echoed. Hell, RKK. We might as well frame it and hang it up as the most passive-aggressive letter ever. I believe their focus on humans might be leveraged, R1N0 added. If they perceive us as a threat, they may also fear us. Fear, Vexer mused, scratching his chin thoughtfully. You might be onto something, R1. If we can make them believe we're more trouble than we're worth. Deception, Takor grunted, a hint of admiration in its gravelly voice. A worthy tactic. Right, Vexer agreed, feeling the stirrings of a plan that could either save them or doom them spectacularly. Let's give them a little show. Make them think twice about poking the human bear. The station shuddered as if in agreement, the flickering lights casting the room in a dance of shadows and determination. It was a gamble, but then again, Vexer had always been a man who thrived on the roll of the dice and the thrill of the unknown. Prepare a broadcast, Vexer instructed, his voice cutting through the din like a lifeline. Let's show these zealots why humans are the galaxy's most unpredictable species. As Flirk worked the controls, Vexer took a deep breath. He was about to bluff his way through an interstellar crisis with more bravado than sense, but sometimes that was all you had. And right now, that had to be enough. The comms flared to life, a connection established with the unidentified ship. Vexer leaned in, his expression set somewhere between defiance and the realization that he might never see a blissfully unremarkable day again. This is Ambassador Vexer Thorn, he announced, his voice carrying through the static like a challenge. You've got a problem with humans? Bring it, you'll find we're not so easy to purge. The silence that followed was almost comforting in its predictability. No immediate retaliation, no instant capitulation. Just the quiet tension of a universe holding its breath, waiting to see if the gamble would pay off or if they'd all go down in a blaze of regrettable decisions. Keep monitoring their response, Vexer instructed, the weight of the moment pressing down like a collapsing star. If we're lucky, they'll think twice about engaging a potential enemy they don't fully understand. R1N0's circuits word. Calculating potential outcomes. Probability of their retreat has increased, but remains uncertain. Sounds like my love life, Vexer quipped, earning a confused glance from Takor and a sound that might have been a laugh from Flirk. As they waited, Vexer couldn't help but grin. A thin, dangerous kind of grin that said, even if they were doomed, they'd at least go out with style. Or at the very least, a memorable explosion. With the pressure of their impending doom hanging over them like a particularly gloomy cloud, they stood ready, united in their shared fate, and perhaps, their shared madness. Here's to surviving, Vexer said, raising an imaginary glass to his lips. And if not, here's to making a hell of an exit. And so, amid the chaos of a decaying space station and a siege from the unknown, Vexer Thorn and his unlikely allies prepared to face whatever came next. Whether it was victory or a spectacular failure, at least they'd know they'd tried. In the end, sometimes trying was all that mattered. And in that, they found a strange comfort, huddled together in the void of space, daring the universe to do its worst. The station's air was getting thin, not just metaphorically. Citadel Station's life support systems were about as reliable as a politician's promise, and the ambiance was starting to resemble a breath-holding competition. The flickering lights overhead contributed to the feeling that any moment could be their last in this interstellar rat trap. Ambassador Vexer Thorn surveyed the chaos with the reluctance of someone watching their own funeral from a bird's-eye view. Resources were dwindling faster than his patience, and something had to give before everyone asphyxiated or lost their minds trying. Enter Syra Quill, human engineer, and the station's last hope for staying one step ahead of becoming cosmic debris. She was a perpetual motion machine of grease-stained overalls and biting sarcasm, currently elbow-deep in what could only be described as technical entrails of the station's backup power grid. "Hey, Syra," Vexer called out, careful not to come too close lest he become an unwitting participant in whatever Frankenstein process she was engaged in. Syra glanced up, a smudge of oil on her cheek giving her the look of a war-paint-smeared veteran. "Vex, if you're here to tell me things are going to hell in a handbasket, save it." "I'm already aware." "Good, because the handbasket's on fire and I'm fresh out of marshmallows," Vexer replied. "How's the tinkering going?" "Just peachy," Syra said, her voice dripping with enough sarcasm to coat a small moon. "I've got a plan to keep us from becoming popsicles, but you're not gonna like it." "Newsflash, Quill," Vexer said, folding his arms. "I'm in no position to not like things right now. Lay it on me." Syra wiped her hands on her overalls, probably adding another layer of questionable hygiene to her already questionable attire. "There's a way to reroute power from non-essential systems to keep life support running, but it means shutting down the holotable." Vexer raised an eyebrow. "You mean the flickering light show that's been more decorative than functional?" "Go on." "Yeah. Well, it's tied into the station's main hub," Syra explained. "Shutting it down will sever most of our comms with anyone outside the station. Great for reducing energy use, bad for staying in touch with the universe. So, kind of like putting your phone on airplane mode during an apocalypse," Vexer mused. "Risky." "Definitely," Syra agreed, "but unless you fancy dying with a perfect signal, it's our best shot. Plus, it'll make a nice surprise for the bugs out there trying to eavesdrop." Vexer considered it. Drastic solutions for drastic times. "Do it," he said, realizing how much he was starting to sound like a cliché action hero. "But make sure Flirk knows. If we go dark without warning, he might try to eat me." "Flirk's more vegetarian than carnivore," Syra noted. "But I'll give him a heads up anyway. No point in adding a diplomatic incident to our to-do list." As Syra got to work, Vexer turned his attention back to the rest of the room. The delegates were stirring, pockets of paranoia growing like mold in a damp corner. Whispers of conspiracy and betrayal floated through the air as thick as burnt coffee. Ambassador RKKTZZ was doing his best to mediate, his insectoid form clicking and whistling in a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of order. It was like watching a diplomat try to calm a pack of feral dogs with a recitation from the Geneva Conventions. "Ambassador Thorn," RKKTZZ clicked, his mandibles working overtime. The delegates grow restless. They fear this is a human plot. "Of course they do," Vexer sighed. "Nothing like a good old-fashioned scapegoat to bring people together. It would be beneficial to quell their fears," RKKTZZ suggested, though it sounded more like a plea. Vexer nodded. "All right, time for some honesty. Let me talk to them." He stepped up to the makeshift podium, a repurposed cargo crate that had seen better days, and addressed the gathering of interstellar skeptics. "Ladies, gentlemen, and everything in between," he began, "I know things look bleak. But rest assured, humans aren't the only idiots in this room." A few chuckles, though mostly nervous ones. "A start, at least. We're not plotting against you," Vexer continued. "If anything, we're too busy trying to save our own skins to worry about interspecies sabotage. So how about we all take a deep breath, figuratively, of course, given the circumstances, and work together?" "Why should we trust you?" a delegate from the ZZ4 Collective demanded, their tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Because I've got nothing to gain from screwing you over," Vexer replied. "And frankly, I'm running on fumes here. If I was planning a coup, don't you think I'd have started with a better plan?" The murmurs continued but were less hostile, as if Vexer's lack of ambition was somehow comforting. He resisted the urge to point out that they were all in the same sinking ship, mainly because he was tired of mixing metaphors. Meanwhile, Syra was hard at work, coaxing the station's reluctant systems into cooperation with the tenacity of a terrier and the finesse of a rhino. She made her way to the control panel, glaring at it like it owed her money. "Okay, you rusty bucket of bolts," she muttered. "Time to shine." With a few deft movements, she rerouted the power, dimming the lights and silencing the holotable. The room plunged into an eerie semi-darkness, the kind that made everyone look at everyone else like they might sprout fangs at any moment. "Relax," Syra shouted from her corner. "We're not blind, just conserving. If anyone complains, they can join me in the maintenance ducts and see how easy it is to keep this place running." "Right," Vexer added, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We're not out of the woods yet, but with Syra's help, we might just avoid becoming interstellar roadkill." RKKTZZ clicked in agreement, his form relaxing slightly, though his eyes stayed wary. "We appreciate your efforts," he said, "even if your methods are unconventional." "Unconventional's just another word for effective," Syra retorted, giving the room a once-over. "Now, unless anyone has a better idea, I suggest we focus on not dying." The station's atmosphere, though tense, seemed to settle slightly. People, or what passed for them, began to return to their discussions, their arguments tempered by the realization that survival was a team sport. Vexer took a moment to breathe, imagining he could taste the relief in the recycled air. It was short-lived, of course, but then again, so was everything in space. "Ambassador Thorne," Flirk called from the control station, his reptilian features barely visible in the dim light. "We may have another issue." "Of course we do," Vexer sighed, making his way over. "What now?" "They're ships," Flirk explained, gesturing at the screen showing the enemy fleet. "They're repositioning. It's possible they're gearing up for another offensive." "Because why not?" Vexer said, rolling his eyes. "R1N0. Any insights?" The robot whirred to life, its lights barely illuminating its form. "They may be interpreting our power conservation as a sign of weakness. Or," Vexer countered, "they're just bored and looking for a way to spice up their day. Probability of them initiating an attack is increasing," R1N0 stated, as dry as ever. "Well, isn't that just the cherry on top of our sundae?" Vexer muttered. "Any suggestions?" Flirk asked, his tone implying that if not, the next suggestion might involve an escape pod. Vexer shrugged, a move that felt both futile and somehow comforting. "We keep playing the hand we're dealt. Syra, you think we can reroute more power to the shields?" Syra looked up from her console, a mix of determination and irritation. "We can try, but if anything shorts, we might end up with half the station in the dark." "Half a station's better than none," Vexer replied. "Let's keep them guessing." As the station teetered on the brink of another crisis, Vexer couldn't help but feel a strange sense of camaraderie with his makeshift crew. They were a ragtag bunch, bound together by nothing more than necessity, desperation, and a shared desire not to become space dust. "Here's to the next round," he murmured, raising his imaginary glass once more. "May we be just lucky enough to survive, but not so lucky that it gets boring." And with that, they hunkered down, ready to face whatever fresh hell awaited them in the cold expanse of space. Because in the end, what other choice did they have? The station was a pressure cooker ready to explode, with every inhabitant feeling the heat. It wasn't just the external threat of the aggressor ships hovering like a dark cloud. It was the internal fractures threatening to splinter the fragile alliance inside Citadel Station. Vexor Thorn found himself in the unenviable position of being the glue holding this cosmic jigsaw together, though it seemed more like trying to staple water. Ambassador Thorn, Flirk hissed, his reptilian patience clearly running thinner than a snake's toenail. The Zzifer Collective and the Burkle Alliance are at each other's throats again. Because of course they are, Vexor sighed. Can't they just agree to disagree and maybe not kill each other in the process? The Burkle accused the Zzifer of sabotaging their food synthesizers, Flirk explained, his voice rising to a pitch that could cause nosebleeds. It's getting ugly, right, because nothing screams diplomatic incident like a food fight, Vexor muttered. Okay, let's go put out that fire before it becomes a full-blown barbecue. RKKTZZ joined them, his insectoid face unreadable but his body language suggesting he'd rather be dealing with a swarm of bees than a swarm of diplomats. This is a delicate situation, Ambassador. Your intervention might be necessary. Delicate like a bull in a china shop, Vexor grumbled. Lead the way. They arrived at the scene to find representatives from both factions hurling accusations and anything else that wasn't bolted down. The air was thick with tension and the unmistakable odor of synthesized protein gone very, very wrong. All right, everyone, simmer down. Vexor shouted over the din, his voice doing its best impression of a foghorn. Unless you want me to start handing out timeouts, we're going to have a little chat. The Zzifer representative, a wiry creature with more appendages than a centipede, glared at him with eyes that looked like they'd been plucked straight from a horror movie. This is a blatant attack on our people. We demand retribution. Retribution, right, Vexor drawled. Because nothing solves problems like more problems, am I right? The Burkle representative, a mass of tentacles and indignation, was equally incensed. We have evidence of tampering. This is an act of war. Evidence? Really? Vexor shot back. Or is it like that time you accused my people of stealing your liquefied snack packs? Because those are still giving my intestines nightmares. He took a step forward, trying to project a confidence he didn't quite feel. Look, we're all stuck on this tin can together. How about we put our energy into not getting blown up by the folks outside instead of each other? You humans always think you can talk your way out of trouble, the Zzifer delegate sneered. Well, it's a hell of a lot better than punching my way out, Vexor replied. Besides, you think I want to be here mediating this? I'd rather be anywhere else, including a dentist's chair. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the delegates eyeing each other warily. Vexor could feel the tension, a thick, soupy thing that wrapped itself around the room. He had to break it before someone did something stupid, like escalate. Hey, RKKTZZ, Vexor said, turning to his insectoid counterpart. Got any ideas? I mean, besides a group hug. RKKTZZ clicked thoughtfully, his mandibles twitching. Perhaps a joint task force to investigate? It would show good faith from both sides. Yeah, that, Vexor agreed, nodding like it had been his idea all along. Joint task force. You get to play detective, and nobody has to lose an antenna. The delegates murmured among themselves, the suggestion taking root as a reasonable alternative to mutual destruction. Vexor could feel the scales tipping back towards something resembling cooperation, though it was more like uneasy tolerance. All right, the Burkle representative conceded. But we want access to all logs and systems related to the incident. And we demand oversight on the investigation, added the Zzifer delegate, his tone begrudging but less hostile. Sure, you can have all the oversight you want, Vexor said, waving a hand dismissively. As long as it keeps you from tearing this place apart before the bad guys outside do. With an agreement reached, however tentative, the groups dispersed, still eyeing each other like alley cats forced to share a trash can. Vexor let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, wondering how long he could keep patching these holes before the whole damn thing sank. That was well handled, RKKTZZ said, his voice a blend of admiration and disbelief. Handled, sure, Vexor replied. But remember, it's only a win if we don't end up as space dust tomorrow. Your confidence is inspiring, RKKTZZ remarked, his mandibles clicking in what might have been a smile. Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises, Vexor said. And caffeine. Lots of caffeine. They returned to the control room, where Syra was still knee-deep in maintenance, her overalls now more oil-stained than fabric. She looked up as they entered, giving them a wry smile. Hey, how's the diplomacy going? She asked, her tone as dry as a Martian summer. About as well as you'd expect with a bunch of aliens who'd rather eat you than listen to you, Vexor replied. How's the duct diving? Let's just say I've spent so much time in these tunnels, I'm starting to develop a friendship with the rats, Syra quipped. At least they don't argue politics. Yet, Vexor muttered, glancing at the flickering screens. How are we looking? Not as terrible as a few hours ago, but that's like saying a hurricane is less terrible than a tornado, Syra replied. I've managed to squeeze a little more juice into the shields, but we're still as fragile as a soap bubble in a knife factory. Great, so we're hanging in there by a thread, Vexor said. That's comforting. Hey, you wanted sugar-coated, you should have brought a candy bar, Syra shot back. I'm doing what I can with the tech equivalent of duct tape and prayers. Guess that's all any of us can do right now, Vexor conceded. Just keep us from imploding, that's all I ask. Right, Syra said, turning back to her work. And if you find a miracle lying around, send it my way. As Vexor watched her tinkering, he couldn't help but admire her tenacity. It was the kind of stubborn resilience that was both maddening and inspiring, a reminder that even in the bleakest corners of space, humanity refused to lie down and die. Ambassador, R1N0 chimed in, its voice breaking Vexor's reverie. We have incoming communications from the aggressor fleet. Of course we do, Vexor groaned, slumping into a chair. Because they were feeling left out. The comm screen crackled to life, revealing the angular, ominous face of the aggressor commander. His expression was a mask of disdain, as if he could smell the chaos through the screen. Ambassador Thorne, the commander intoned, his voice like gravel rolling down a hill. I trust your defenses are still holding. Last I checked, we weren't floating in space without life support, Vexor replied, matching sarcasm with sarcasm. So yeah, we're holding. You cannot hope to withstand us forever, the commander continued, eyes narrowing. Surrender now, and I may yet show mercy. Surrender, right, Vexor said, scratching his head. Let me think about it. How about no? The commander's expression darkened, a storm on the horizon. Your defiance will be your undoing. Maybe, Vexor shrugged, but at least we'll go out with style. The screen flickered off as abruptly as it had come to life, leaving the room in silence once more. Flirk looked at Vexor, his scales shifting in what could only be described as concern. Ambassador, is antagonizing them wise? Flirk inquired. Wise? Probably not, Vexor admitted. But I've found that ticking off your enemies can sometimes make them trip over their own egos. A dangerous game, RKKTZZ observed. But perhaps the only one we have. Exactly, Vexor said, feeling the weight of the room's collective fate on his shoulders. And if bluffing keeps them from blowing us to bits for a little while longer, I'll take it. The room settled into a tense, waiting quiet, the kind that made you wonder if the universe was holding its breath alongside you. Vexor glanced at his unlikely allies, a motley crew of diplomats, technicians, and warriors, all bound together by the simple desire to see another sunrise. All right, he said, standing up and shaking off the gloom. Let's get back to work. The universe isn't going to save itself. And so they dove back into the chaos, each doing their part to keep the station from falling apart at the seams. Because in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing, it was about surviving, one grim, humor-laden moment at a time. The lights flickered like a dying firefly, and then darkness swallowed Citadel Station whole. With the kind of dramatic flair that would have impressed Shakespeare, the power grid finally gave up the ghost. Vexor Thorne was left sitting in pitch-black silence, wondering if this was the universe's not-so-subtle way of telling him to take up farming on some backwater planet. Well, isn't this just magical, he muttered to himself, the darkness pressing in like an unwelcome hug. Somewhere to his right, R1N0's voice crackled to life, the robotic assistant valiantly maintaining its electronic cheerfulness. It appears we've encountered a critical failure, Ambassador. No kidding, R1N0, Vexor replied, crossing his arms. Did the flickering lights give it away, or was it the fact I can't see my hand in front of my face? RKKTZZ, who had been lurking nearby in the shadows, chimed in with a voice that could cut glass. Darkness might suit some, but it is not conducive to diplomacy. Tell that to the universe, Vexor grumbled. Or whatever sadistic entity decided we needed to up the difficulty level on this nightmare. Across the room, Syra was buried under what sounded like a pile of tools. This isn't a blackout, it's a black hole. Everything's gone kaput faster than a cheetah on Energon, she called out, her voice echoing in the void. Vexor made a face, not that anyone could see it. You mean you didn't fix everything yet? I'm shocked. Hey, fixing a station that's older than my grandmother with spit and prayers takes time, Syra shot back, her voice a blend of frustration and determination. The backup power grid is fried. We're running on fumes here, Ambassador. Great. So, we're a soap bubble in a knife factory without the bubble part, Vexor said. That's comforting. RKKT's mandibles clicked nervously. The aggressors are unlikely to wait patiently while we fumble for solutions in the dark. Yeah, I'm sure they're lining up to offer us batteries, Vexor replied, sarcasm dripping from every word. What are we dealing with, Syra? Life support's still limping along, thanks to some creative rewiring, but for how long, who knows, she explained. And the shields are flirting with the idea of non-existence. Flirting, huh? I wish they'd just commit already, Vexor sighed. What about communication? Please tell me we can still talk to those lovely folks outside. Define talk, Syra said. We're on the backup of the backup's backup. I'd say we're about one more sneeze away from total silence. Ah, the sweet sound of impending doom, Vexor said. Just what I wanted to hear. Flirk, ever the pragmatist, snorted. We should prepare for defense. If the aggressors choose this moment to strike, we will not even have the luxury of seeing our deaths coming. A comforting thought, Flirk, Vexor replied. Add it to my list of things to worry about. In the oppressive, sightless silence, the station seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which side would flinch first, the collapsing infrastructure or the terrified inhabitants. Alliances crumbled like stale cookies, as survival instincts kicked in. The Burkle and Zizifer delegations were already eyeing the escape pods, a move Vexor envied, if only for the chance to be somewhere that smelled less like fear and burnt circuits. Can we at least keep the peace while we descend into chaos? Vexor asked, mostly to himself. You humans have a peculiar way of managing crises, RKKTZZ observed, managing to sound both impressed and horrified. Yeah, it's called winging it, Vexor said. I thought at least the darkness would stop the bickering, but it seems like that's just wishful thinking. As the fraught silence stretched, Syra's voice piped up again, sounding a tad more optimistic. I might have a lead on getting some auxiliary power back online. It's a long shot, but what the hell, right? Long shots are the theme of the day, Vexor replied. Throw it in, Syra. Maybe the universe is feeling generous. You mean reckless, Syra corrected. But I'll take reckless over nothing. The dim emergency lights flickered back to life, bathing the room in a ghostly glow that made everyone look like extras from a bad horror vid. It was just enough light to see the collective expressions of doubt and dread that painted everyone's faces. See? Progress, Vexor said, forcing some cheer into his voice. We've gone from complete darkness to slightly less complete darkness. R1N0's voice crackled with what could only be interpreted as concern, though who knew with robots. Ambassador, this level of power conservation will only last for a limited period. Yeah, I figured as much, Vexor said. But let's enjoy the ambiance while it lasts. Flirk, never one to let a crisis pass without adding his own brand of cynicism, grumbled. Ambiance is not what I would call it, human. Well, what would you call it then? Vexor asked, raising an eyebrow. A disaster, Flirk replied flatly. That's the spirit, Vexor said, clapping him on the back. Keep up that optimism. The mood in the control room was as grim as ever, a stark reminder that humor could only carry them so far before reality set in, grim and harsh. The station's creaking infrastructure was a ticking time bomb, and the aggressors outside were holding the detonator. All right, folks, Vexor said, standing up straighter and trying to rally what little morale there was. We might be up Space Creek without a thruster, but we're in this together. We'll keep this station running, if only out of sheer bloody-mindedness. You do have a way with words, Ambassador, RKKTZZ noted dryly. Yeah, well, if words were weapons, I'd have already won this damn war, Vexor replied. Now let's see if we can't squeeze a few more minutes of life out of this rusting heap. With that, the group settled into a grim routine of patching up systems and praying to whatever cosmic entities might be listening. Hours stretched into a blur of frantic activity, each minute a desperate race against the inevitable. Hey, Syra, Vexer called over, as she wrestled with a particularly stubborn circuit board. You doing okay over there? As okay as I can be when I'm trying to fix ancient tech with a multi-tool and some hope, she replied, her voice muffled by the panel. Hope, huh? I thought we'd run out of that ages ago, Vexer said, chuckling. Yeah, but it turns out hope regenerates when you're stubborn as hell, Syra shot back, a wry grin audible even if it wasn't visible. Good to know, Vexer said. We'll need all the hope we can get. As the hours dragged on, the station groaned under the strain, like a beleaguered beast on its last legs. Vexer found himself wondering if he'd ever see another sunrise, or even if sunrises were still a thing outside of textbooks. Every rumble, every flicker of lights, felt like the universe testing their resolve, squeezing them until something, anything, gave way. Ambassador R1N0 interrupted his thoughts, breaking the heavy silence. Incoming transmission from the aggressors. Of course there is, Vexer sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Let's hear it, then. The screen flickered, and the grim visage of the aggressor commander filled it once again. His disdain was almost palpable, even across the void of space. Ambassador Thorn, he began, his tone as icy as ever. You are persistent, if nothing else. Persistence or stupidity, Vexer replied. It's a thin line, and I'm balancing right on it. We tire of this charade, the commander continued. The offer of mercy is rescinded. You have until dawn to surrender, or we will reduce your station to atoms. Generous as always, Vexer said, not missing a beat. And here I thought your lot didn't have a sense of humor. The screen went dark once more, leaving the room in tense silence. Flirk looked at Vexer, his eyes narrowed. Dawn? Flirk asked, incredulous. How can there be a dawn in space? Figure of speech, Vexer replied, his voice weary. Though poetic irony aside, it does seem they're planning to make good on their threats. Syra shook her head, setting down her tools with a clatter. Well, it looks like we've got our work cut out for us. Again, what's the plan, Ambassador? RKKTZZ asked, turning his multifaceted gaze towards Vexer. The plan? Vexer echoed, incredulous. Hell, if I knew that, I'd be sipping cocktails on a beach somewhere, laughing at you all. Confidence inspiring, as always, RKKTZZ said, his mandibles twitching in what could have been amusement or terror. We need to find some way to either hold them off or make them change their minds, Vexer said. I don't care if it involves smoke and mirrors or actual magic. Magic might be our best bet, Syra commented dryly. Since logic and science seem to have taken a vacation. Yeah, they left us here with the bill, Vexer replied. All right, everyone, let's get to it. If nothing else, let's give them a hell of a fight. With that, they returned to their tasks, hearts heavy but hands determined. The station was a crumbling relic, but it was their relic, and damn it, they'd go down fighting. In the end, it wasn't about winning or making history. It was about defying fate and flipping the bird to the universe that seemed intent on writing them off. As the hours ticked by, the station teetered on the edge of oblivion, the aggressor fleet a silent predator lurking in the shadows. But inside, the motley crew of diplomats, engineers, and warriors held the line with grit, snark, and a stubborn refusal to die quietly. And in that darkest hour, Vexer couldn't help but crack a smile. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was surviving against the odds, one grimly humorous moment at a time. The Citadel station had seen better days, or, as some cynics would claim, better centuries. While the station's inhabitants sat in their dim, flickering control room, the universe outside remained calm and uncaring. But if there was one thing that humans had learned to do, it was to turn chaos into an art form. Vexer Thorn leaned against a wall, trying to muster another ounce of patience. All right, folks, let's have a chat. We've been dodging the proverbial bullet for days now. It's time to start aiming it back at the shooter. Syra Quill looked up from her control panel, a tangled mess of wires and circuits spread before her like a surgeon's nightmare. You got a plan, Ambassador? Or are we just going to wing it and hope the universe is in a generous mood today? Vexer snorted. Oh, the universe hasn't been in a generous mood since the Big Bang. But I do have a notion, something that might just confuse those aggressors out there. Confuse them? RKKT's mandibles clicked skeptically. With all due respect, Ambassador, confusion is not typically a battle strategy. It is when they have no idea what we're up to, Vexer countered. See, those aggressors don't know a damn thing about human culture, right? I suppose, Syra mused, her hands still working as if possessed by the spirit of a particularly irritable electrician. But what human culture are you thinking of using? Our ability to binge watch shows about dragons and zombies? Vexer grinned. No, we're going to deploy something far more baffling. Bureaucracy. Flirk, who had been silent, finally spoke. Bureaucracy? You plan to drown them in paperwork? More like procedure, Vexer corrected. We're going to act like every day is a routine day and see how they like it. Syra raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite herself. Go on. They're expecting us to panic, to scramble around like headless chickens, or whatever avian equivalent your species might prefer, Vexer explained, nodding to RKKTZZ. But instead, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to make it look like we're going about our usual business. Usual business on a collapsed station, Flirk pointed out. How do you propose we do that? By pretending that everything's under control, Vexer said with a shrug. Start with mundane, routine human tasks. We'll broadcast it on every frequency, make them question their own sensors. You want us to make coffee? Syra asked, her voice laced with disbelief. Sure, why not? We'll throw in some laundry folding and report filing for good measure, Vexer replied, arms crossed and confident. Confusion is an underrated weapon. And you think this will work? RKKTZZ inquired, his tone skeptical but showing a spark of interest. Honestly, probably not, Vexer admitted. But if it buys us time, it's worth a shot. Plus, if we're going down, we might as well go down acting like the absurd spacefarers we are. Syra laughed, a short, sharp sound. And here I thought we were fresh out of crazy ideas. All right, I'm in. Let's confuse the hell out of them. Good, Vexer said, clapping his hands together. R1N0, start broadcasting a delightful playlist of elevator music. Let's make this station feel like a waiting room. Certainly, Ambassador, R1N0 replied with synthetic cheer. Initiating mood enhancement protocol. Within moments, the tinny strains of ancient Earth jazz filled the control room, a jarring contrast to the tension hanging in the air. The inhabitants exchanged bemused looks, the ridiculousness of it all sparking a few wry smiles. Now, Syra, since you're already at the panel, why don't you send out a message about a pretend maintenance check scheduled for, let's say next week, Vexer suggested. Consider it done, Syra said as she typed furiously. I'll make it sound as dull and routine as a mid-galactic tax audit. Flirk folded his arms, his reptilian eyes narrowing. And what do we warriors do in this absurd plan? You, my scaly friend, are going to practice some drills, Vexer said. Nothing like a good old-fashioned training montage to confuse the enemy. They'll see our warriors preparing, and it might just spook them into thinking we have a trick up our sleeve. I detest your plan, Flirk said, though a hint of amusement curled his lip. But its insanity may just be its brilliance. Exactly, Vexer replied, his grin widening. They'll never expect it because it's too stupid to work. RKKTZZ clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. This strategy is beyond unorthodox. It borders on madness. Makes sense, Vexer said. We humans have always excelled at teetering on the edge of madness. With a new, albeit bizarre, plan in place, the group set to work. The control room, once a hive of frenetic activity, now bustled with an odd sense of normalcy, as if the threat of annihilation was just another item to tick off a never-ending to-do list. Syra, Vexer called over, how's that coffee coming along? Working on it, Syra replied, her hands deftly manipulating the controls of the station's antiquated coffee synthesizer. Just hope the food synthesizers aren't as temperamental as the power grid. If they are, I'll take mine with an extra shot of apocalypse, Vexer said. The room filled with the rich aroma of synthesized coffee, a smell that seemed alien in the sterile confines of the space station. For a moment, everyone paused, savoring the small luxury amid the chaos. Well, if this is our last stand, at least we'll be caffeinated, Syra quipped, handing Vexer a steaming mug. Cheers, Vexer said, raising his cup. To bureaucracy, coffee, and the audacity of hopelessness. The others lifted their respective beverages, some containing experimental alien concoctions, others simple water. It was a strange toast, but fitting in its own way. Outside, The aggressor fleet orbited like a school of sharks circling a wounded prey. Their sensors would pick up the bizarre transmissions, the misleading signals creating a fog of confusion. The aggressors, trained to anticipate panic and resistance, now faced an enigma wrapped in a mundane mystery. "Do you think they're buying it?" Flirk asked, his skepticism tinging his voice. "If they're not, they're at least scratching their heads," Vexor replied. "And that's all we need, a little confusion, a little delay." RKKTZZ tilted his head. "And if they are not confused? Then we'll just have to improvise," Vexor said, taking a sip of coffee. "Like we always do." As the hours dragged on, the station's inhabitants settled into their roles, each part of the performance more surreal than the last. Routines were established, checklists were ticked off, reports filed, and drills practiced. It was a farce, but an effective one. "Funny, isn't it?" Syra said, sidling up to Vexor during one of their many breaks. "How pretending everything's normal makes it feel a little better." "Yeah, it's like putting a coat of paint over rust," Vexor said, staring out into the void beyond the station. "Might not fix the problem, but it sure makes it look nice for a while." "Do you think this will really work?" Syra asked, her voice quieter now, as if afraid the universe might be listening in on their secret. Vexor shrugged, the weight of uncertainty a familiar companion. "Honestly, I don't know. But if it doesn't, at least we didn't die sitting on our hands." The two shared a moment of silence, the quiet punctuated by the soft whir of machinery and the distant hum of the station's life support systems. The Citadel station was old, its bones creaking under the stress of time and neglect, but it was still standing, for now. "Whatever happens, Syra," Vexor said softly, "it's been an honor turning bureaucracy into a weapon with you." Syra laughed, a genuine, relieved sound. "Likewise, Vexor. Who knew saving our skins would involve so much paperwork?" Their moment was interrupted by R1N0, who approached with all the enthusiasm of a golden retriever. "Ambassador, there's been a change in the aggressor's formation." "See?" Vexor said, grinning. "Told you confusion was our friend. Let's see what they're up to." The group gathered around the holotable, watching as the enemy ships rearranged themselves, their movements unsure and hesitant. It was a small victory, but in the grand scheme of their own survival, every small victory counted. As they watched, Takor joined them, his presence a silent reminder of the warrior spirit that still thrived within the station. "Your plan seems to be working, Ambassador." "Yeah, well, let's not start celebrating just yet," Vexor warned, though his eyes sparkled with a hint of hope he tried to keep buried beneath layers of cynicism. Takor nodded, his expression grave. "We should prepare for when they realize the truth." "We will," Vexor assured him. "But for now, let's enjoy the fact that the universe is, just this once, on our side." With their bizarre tactics in play and the aggressors momentarily stymied, the station found a new rhythm amidst the chaos. Tasks were carried out with the grim determination of those who knew that victory was not a guarantee, but a possibility worth fighting for. As the hours passed, a sense of camaraderie grew among the station's diverse inhabitants. The absurdity of their situation had bonded them in a way that no amount of diplomacy or negotiation ever could. Here, in the gloom of the failing station, they found a common purpose: to survive, and to do so in a way that defied expectations. In the quiet moments between tasks, Vexor reflected on the strange path that had brought them here. He thought of the diplomats, the warriors, the technicians, all those who had come together to form this ragtag alliance. They were a motley crew, bound by desperation and a shared stubbornness to continue fighting, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. "All right, everyone," Vexor said, addressing the room once more. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've bought ourselves some breathing room. Let's make it count." With that, they returned to their tasks, determined to hold the line against the looming threat. The Citadel station, battered and beleaguered, stood as a testament to human ingenuity and sheer cussedness. It was a relic, a forgotten outpost in a universe that had moved on, but it was theirs, and they would defend it with every ounce of strength they possessed. As the station continued its dance of deception, Vexor couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily crushed beneath the weight of reality, but it was there, a spark of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Perhaps, just perhaps, they might yet find a way to outwit their aggressors and live to see another day. And if not, well, at least they'd go down as the most bureaucratically baffling defeat in history. The control room of Citadel Station had settled into a bizarre tableau of organized chaos. With the station's inhabitants caught in the surreal dance of pretending normalcy, Vexor Thorn half expected reality itself to throw up its hands and walk away in disgust. Instead, it seemed to be working. Go figure. Flurk was leading his warriors through another set of drills, their movements precise yet languid, almost as if they were performing a particularly aggressive form of Tai Chi. You know, Vexor called out, if you keep moving like that, they might mistake us for a dance troupe. Flurk didn't even break stride. If they're entertained, maybe they'll leave us alone. Or offer us a job. Takor grumbled from where he stood, fiddling with a gadget that looked suspiciously like it might explode at any moment. We could use the extra credits. Vexor chuckled, sipping his rapidly cooling coffee. If we survive this, Takor, I'll personally recommend you to the Galactic Ballet. Syra, hunched over the ancient console, looked up from her work. That's if the station doesn't decide to take a permanent nap. This tech's older than my grandmother's favorite excuses. Ah, but does it wear the same knitted shawl? Vexor quipped. Only if you count duct tape as a fashion accessory, Syra shot back, tapping the display to highlight the station's declining power levels. I think we're going to need another layer of paint on that rust, Vexor. R1N0 whizzed over, holographic display flickering. Ambassador, the aggressor ships have altered their formation again. It seems they're playing a game of interstellar musical chairs. Great, Vexor muttered. At least someone's having fun. RKKTZZ, who had been observing the hologram with the focus of a mantis eyeing its next meal, clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. Perhaps they are attempting to decipher our strategy. Good luck to them, Syra said, smirking. I can barely decipher it, and I helped come up with it. Vexor leaned back, watching the shifting dots representing the enemy fleet. Just a little longer, he murmured. Let's keep them guessing. Outside, the aggressors were indeed puzzled. Used to human behavior that was typically erratic, violent, or both, they were unprepared for this particular brand of insanity. Citadel Station was running drills, broadcasting maintenance schedules, and apparently, according to a garbled message, debating whether to repaint the hull a nice shade of surrender beige. Flurk's warriors had taken to their drills with a sort of bemused dedication. They executed maneuvers designed to intimidate, yet the sheer monotony seemed to be having the opposite effect on their alien onlookers. The aggressor's leader, somewhere in the labyrinthine corridors of his weapon-laden command ship, was likely wondering if he had invaded a circus. Maybe they think we're preparing for some grand festival, Flurk suggested, pausing to wipe an imaginary smudge off his purple-scaled arm. You think they'd RSVP? Vexor asked, raising an eyebrow. Only if it's black tie, Syra replied, her fingers still dancing across her console. The hours dragged on. The station maintained its ruse, even as its systems groaned under the weight of disrepair. Life support wheezed and sputtered like an asthmatic dragon, and the lights flickered in a constant game of will they won't they. Yet the residents carried on, bolstered by the tiny victories they didn't dare name. R1N0 approached once more, ever the bearer of unexpected tidings. Ambassador, there appears to be increased chatter among the aggressors' communications. Their confusion levels have reached unprecedented heights. Well, good, Vexor said, grinning. Nothing like a little organized chaos to keep the neighbors on their toes. Takor, never one to let a good opportunity slip by, grunted in agreement. Could be they've finally realized they're dealing with the galaxy's least predictable species. Or they're just too polite to ask for directions, RKKTZZ said, his mandibles twitching in what Vexor assumed was the Threatney equivalent of a grin. That's the spirit, Vexor exclaimed, lifting his mug in mock salute. To friendly neighbors and confusing the hell out of them. The station continued to hum with activity. Vexor found himself oddly comforted by the routine, even if it was built on a foundation of absurdity. He was reminded of an old Earth saying about storms and teacups, though this felt more like a hurricane in an espresso shot. Ambassador, Syra called out, we're receiving a request for communication from the aggressor fleet. Vexor exchanged glances with his companions, each equally surprised. This could be it, he said, his voice a mix of hope and trepidation. Patch it through, Syra. The screen blinked to life, revealing a pale, gaunt figure whose expression was lost somewhere between a sneer and a sneer's less friendly cousin. Humans, it began, voice dripping with disdain. State your intentions. Vexer considered the alien visage, then leaned into the proverbial microphone. Well, right now we're debating between lunch and a nap. Leaning towards lunch, but there's a lot of support for a solid 40 winks. The alien blinked, clearly taken aback. This is not a time for levity. Buddy, Vexer replied, if not now, when? He gestured expansively, as if to encompass the entirety of human history and its penchant for panic-induced humor. The alien scowled, or at least, Vexer thought it did. With that many eyes, it was hard to tell. Your strategy is confusing, it admitted reluctantly. Oh, good, Syra muttered under her breath. It's not just us. That's the idea, Vexer continued, cheerfully ignoring decorum. We figured if we didn't understand it, neither would you. The alien's expression shifted to something resembling consideration. Your lack of traditional resistance tactics has been noted. Glad you're taking notes. Tekor interjected, his voice dry enough to start fires. Hope you brought a pen. The alien hesitated, then spoke again. Our patience with this farce is waning. We will withdraw for now, but be warned, Vexer cut in smoothly. We're always warned. It's like the universe's favorite song. We get it, you'll be back. There was a pause as the alien processed this, then a curt nod. The screen went black, leaving the control room in stunned silence. That, Flirk said slowly, was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen. Why not both? Vexer replied, the weight of the encounter beginning to settle in his bones. RKKTZZ clicked his mandibles appreciatively. It appears that confusion was indeed our ally. Guess it really is the spice of life, Syra quipped, relief evident in her voice. The station's inhabitants shared a moment of disbelief-laden camaraderie, the absurdity of their success just beginning to sink in. They had outlasted the siege not with guns or grand speeches, but with paperwork and shared bewilderment. Vexer turned to look out into the vastness of space, where the aggressor ships were retreating in disgruntled defeat. It wasn't the clean, heroic victory of legend or lore, but it was theirs. Messy, improbable, and carried off with the same aplomb as a juggler's last-ditch save. Well, he said, flashing a weary grin at his compatriots, I think we've officially outdone ourselves in the art of unexpected victories. And what an art it is, Tekor agreed, the barest hint of a smile in his voice. As Citadel Station began the slow process of returning to whatever passed for normal, the inhabitants allowed themselves a moment of rare, unguarded triumph. It wasn't perfect, wasn't even close, but it was enough to carry them through another day. The aftermath of the retreat felt like the morning after a particularly rowdy party, a headache, a mess to clean up, and the vague sense something important had been accomplished. Citadel Station's inhabitants stumbled through their routines with the weary satisfaction of survivors who had outwitted fate with a deck stacked against them. Vexer Thorn surveyed the control room, where the leftover chaos had settled like a disgruntled cat. I'd call that a success, he announced, if I had the faintest idea what we actually did. Confused them into submission, Syra replied, her fingers still dancing across the ancient console. Who knew baffling your enemies could be an effective defense strategy? Probably the same people who think putting bacon on everything is a good idea, Tekor said, still tinkering with his gadget. It hadn't exploded yet, which everyone took as a small miracle. Across the room, Flirk and his warriors were finally dropping their guard, moving with the languid exhaustion of soldiers who had been on high alert for too long. Flirk joined Vexer, his reptilian eyes blinking slowly. The aggressors retreated. Does this mean we've won? More like we've called a temporary truce in the war of idiocy, Vexer answered. But hey, I'll take it. R1N0 hovered nearby, its holographic display flickering with the remnants of the aggressor's retreat. Ambassador, the station's communication channels are abuzz with renewed talks of peace among the delegates. Vexer snorted. Peace? Is that what they're calling this festival of dysfunction? RKKTZZ, who had spent the last few hours observing the proceedings with the intensity only an insectoid could muster, clicked his mandibles. Your human resilience is remarkable, Ambassador Thorn. If by resilience you mean our incredible talent for winging it, then yes, Vexer replied with a grin. It's practically a national pastime. The insectoid ambassador tilted his head in that way that suggested either confusion or amusement, possibly both. The Thrakni have much to learn from your species. Well, for starters, never underestimate the power of stubborn optimism, Vexer said, raising his now cold coffee in a mock toast. As if on cue, the lights flickered ominously before stabilizing into something resembling normalcy. The station, still an aging wreck held together by duct tape and hope, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief along with its inhabitants. Flirk nodded slowly. So, what now? Now, Vexer said, we go back to pretending everything's under control. With added enthusiasm this time. Syra chuckled, finally stepping away from the console. Well, pretending is what we're best at. Who would have thought diplomacy was just theater for the masochistic? Just don't tell the aggressors, Takor quipped. If they figure out we're all improvising, we're dead. Ah, but that's the beauty of it, Vexer said. We're so good at pretending, we might even fool ourselves. The delegates, having been reminded of their mortality in a most inconvenient manner, were quick to regroup. If there was one thing politics taught, it was to never let a crisis go to waste. Ambassadors from the Zizifer Collective and the Burkle Alliance, whose previous conversations had been about as friendly as a knife fight, suddenly found themselves with a common interest in not being blown to bits. Funny how a shared threat could inspire the kind of camaraderie that years of negotiations couldn't. In a room that had once been used for anything but its current purpose, serving as a makeshift conference hall, the delegates gathered with grim determination and a newfound respect for the unpredictable nature of humans. Vexer took his place among them, feeling like the proverbial cat in a room full of rocking chairs. All right, folks, he said, clapping his hands together. Let's talk peace. And by peace, I mean not killing each other before lunch. The delegates exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable. The Thrakni ambassador spoke first, his voice clicking with the rapidity of someone who had seen too much and learned too little. Ambassador Thorn, it seems your unconventional approach has left us with no choice but to reconsider our positions. Unconventional is just another word for effective, Vexer replied, flashing a grin that was equal parts charm and mischief. We humans are nothing if not resourceful. RKKTZZ nodded, a rare expression of insectoid approval. Indeed, your actions have demonstrated the potential for unity in diversity. Or at least unity in not getting blown up, Takor added, ever the pragmatist. The Burkle representative, a creature with too many arms and not enough patience, interjected. We must discuss terms for continued peace. The conflict has drained all parties involved. Drained, frustrated, and made us rethink our life choices, Vexer said. But hey, that's diplomacy for you. The room filled with the murmurs of negotiation, the kind that felt as tedious as it did vital. But there was a rhythm to it, a sense of moving towards something better, even if that something was just less likely to explode. As the talks progressed, Vexer couldn't help but reflect on the unexpected strengths his species had displayed. Humans were unpredictable, chaotic, and prone to making things up as they went along. But they were also resilient, adaptable, and above all, survivors. R1N0, ever attentive, floated over with a report. Ambassador, the initial feedback from the delegates suggests a willingness to pursue a long-term peace agreement. Vexer leaned back, the weight of the galaxy's most unlikely diplomats settling comfortably on his shoulders. Well, that's one for the history books. Or whatever passes for them these days. Do you think it'll last? Flirk asked, skepticism etched into every scale. I think, Vexer replied, that if we can get these folks to agree on anything, we can get them to agree on peace. Syra, ever the cynic, chimed in. And if not, we'll just confuse them again. Exactly, Vexer said, we've got a secret weapon now. The hours slipped by, each moment a step closer to a future that, while uncertain, held the promise of something resembling stability. The delegates, for all their differences, found common ground amid the chaos they had narrowly escaped. A tentative agreement was reached, the kind that left room for improvement but was stronger for the shared experience that had forged it. It was a beginning, imperfect yet hopeful, and in the grand scheme of things, that was more than anyone had anticipated. As the meeting adjourned, Vexer found himself surrounded by allies who had once been rivals, each departing with a nod of respect to the human who had somehow managed to hold it all together with spit and string. RKKTZZ paused before leaving, his mandibles clicking in a pattern Vexer had come to recognize as thoughtful. Ambassador Thorn, your actions were unexpected. Unexpected is my middle name, Vexer said with a wink. Well, that and extremely lucky. You have given us much to consider, the Thrakni ambassador concluded, his voice a low hum of contemplation. Good, Vexer replied, Consideration is the first step to doing something stupid less often. As the insectoid departed, Vexor turned to his companions, who looked as worn out as he felt. Well, team, we did it. We survived. Survived the aggressors, survived each other, and survived this station's tendency to fall apart at the worst possible moments, Syra added. And they say miracles don't happen, Takor said with a shake of his head. It wasn't a miracle, Vexor corrected. It was human resilience, plain and simple. Flurk nodded. You humans are indeed a fascinating species. Vexor chuckled. And don't you forget it. The station settled into what passed for peace, a fragile yet comforting state that promised more than it threatened. It was a small victory, but in a universe where the big victories were few and far between, it was enough. As Vexor gazed out into the depths of space, where the aggressors had vanished into the void, he felt a weary satisfaction settle over him. There would be more challenges, more crises, and undoubtedly more chaos. But for now, they had weathered the storm together, and that was a foundation worth building on. Here's to organized chaos, he said, raising his mug in a final toast. And to the humans who thrive on it. The control room echoed with laughter, a sound that felt rare and precious amid the clamor of survival. For the first time in too long, Citadel Station felt like home.